Namaste. Amen and blessed be. So this month at Tapestry, we're talking about hospitality. And most of the focus will be on offering help to those in need. But this week, we consider the life-giving perspective of receiving hospitality and being gracious guests in this amazing world. The parable of the Good Samaritan that I told earlier is probably the most emblematic example of hospitality in the Western world. Most states even have Good Samaritan laws protecting people who try to help another person in need. The story is depicted in countless pieces of art, and it's probably, when pressed, the first, maybe the only parable that most of us could name. But in our strangely achievement-oriented American culture, we've pretty dramatically misunderstood the point of that story. The story isn't an injunction to help people in need. It's a reminder that our life depends on help from strangers. You never know when you might rely on the most unlikely of people to give you a helping hand. The whole thing starts, remember, as the lawyer asks Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" And the answer, perhaps a long-winded answer, is the story to who is my neighbor. So to understand this story, we have to understand how Jesus' audience might have identified with the characters. There are only a handful of characters in the story: a traveler, some robbers, a priest, a Levite, the Samaritan, and the innkeeper. Obviously, no one wants to be the robbers. And the priest and the Levite were kind of dicey characters themselves. Samaritans were absolutely hated people on the other side of a vast political and religious rift from the Jewish community. It's almost certain that the audience hearing the story would understand themselves in the role of the traveler. Remember, it's all an answer to the question, who is my neighbor? The story answers, my neighbor is the person who is kind to me, who shows compassion, regardless of how I might see our cultural differences. It's not a story about saving people in need. It's a story about being grateful for unexpected kindness, and about knowing that you might one day turn to the most unlikely of people for help. It begs the question, who are the Samaritans in our lives? Who are the neighbors we disregard today but may deeply need in the future? Before I came to Tapestry 4 years ago, I think, I served as the minister of the UU congregation in Laguna Beach. And while I was there, that congregation and I in particular were pretty involved with the Interfaith Council in town. In that tiny town, we were United Methodists and Presbyterians, Catholics, Unitarian Universalists, religious scientists, Mormons, and probably a few more. Where the big political issues were concerned, we were all over the map. We generally did a good job of avoiding those topics, though. Each month, our meetings were held at a different congregation. That way we could see each other's spaces and there weren't any power dynamics involved in the hosting. But by a strange twist of fate, the meeting just after the Proposition 8 ruling was to be held at the Mormon Church. In 2008, Proposition 8 created a state constitutional amendment stating that only marriage between a man and a woman is valid in California. Some of you undoubtedly remember this moment. It was a devastating blow to the LGBT community and their allies, and it was financially supported largely by the Mormon Church. I will never forget the deep uneasiness of stepping into a Mormon church just days after we lost. After several deep breaths and remembering that I personally knew everyone around the table, I went in and we had a productive meeting. Now, most interfaith councils, if you've been involved in this work, they focus a lot on religious cooperation and talking about their religion. But the Laguna Beach group was quite different. We had a different goal in mind. We focused on action and caring for the homeless community in Laguna Beach. Together, we advocated for better resources, and somehow we organized volunteers to provide hot meals 7 nights a week for the homeless shelter in town. It was a truly diverse voice for compassion in the city. Now, near the end of my time there at Laguna Beach, I submitted an editorial in the local paper. I don't remember exactly what was happening then, but it had something to do with the Boy Scouts and inclusion of gay scouts or leaders at the time. Shortly after having that published, at an Interfaith Council event, one of the members of the council from the Mormon Church thanked me for writing the article. She was in complete agreement with what I had written and wanted to be sure that I knew that. Now, through 11 years of ministry and quite a bit more than that in activism, I've been quoted in the paper several times, and it usually comes with some amount of feedback or commentary. But this affirmation was exceptional. The kindness of someone I had generally dismissed on this issue was profoundly moving. I didn't know that I needed her affirmation, but her kindness filled something in me. There's something incredibly powerful about receiving hospitality from unexpected places. It's disarming. It reminds us that the effort we put into keeping our guard up may not be worth it all the time. Receiving this kind of unexpected hospitality pushes back against the myth of individual independence and reminds us that we need one another, not just our families and our friends, but a whole vast network of people just to get through this life. We all have received kindness from unexpected sources. Rather than seeing them as victories or exceptions to the rule, let us be grateful for the hospitality of our neighbors. And remember that we will need help from people who are different from us over and over again. Not only do we rely on strangers for hospitality, or neighbors, we also rely on the hospitality of our earth. We're only here for a short time after all. In the grand scheme of things, we're visitors. Sometimes life feels like it's flashing by. That's because it is. I looked up some of these numbers this week. Apparently, the average American life expectancy now is about 79 years. It's a blip in human history. We've been around as humans for about 200,000 years. Even that is a flash in the 4.5 billion years of the Earth. I did some very rough math, and if I got my zeros right, human history is all of 1/2000th of the history of the planet. That's nothing. We're here for a brief moment, visitors to this world, Still, we have deluded ourselves into thinking this earth, this creation, is ours to control. For the past couple of hundred years, Europeans and Americans have been hell-bent on taming the land and controlling the powers of nature. And we actually believe we can do it. More recently, some environmentally aware folks have come to see the earth not as something to control, but something to protect. Even that framework, though, I think, kind of misunderstands our place in the larger context. It's not ours to control. The earth is productive and fruitful far beyond anything that we can conjure up. And it can deliver wrath and punishment. It can offer restorative powers in the most destitute situations. We're guests passing through, dependent on the good graces of our host for our survival. What would it look like if we responded in gratitude rather than trying to control? What if we acted like house guests to a gracious host? For starters, when you visit someone's home, especially for the first time, you try to get a sense of how things are done. What are the rules of this house? Should I take off my shoes as I come in? Are we passing the food around the table? Where would you like me to sit? Imagine if we spent that kind of energy in understanding the way the earth ran before setting out on our own projects. What are the rules here on this holy ground? Should we take off our shoes? We certainly don't want to wear out our welcome. A good guest tries to understand the rules, and they don't take more than they need. If there are other guests in the house, a gracious guest makes sure that everyone has what they need and the resources are shared. The holidays are coming up. I imagine several of you will be crammed in some tight quarters with other family members. I know I'll be at home with 7 of us in the house for a week. It's a big change when you live alone. Sometimes being a good guest means sharing to the point of being a little uncomfortable. It's just what you do. Might we also consider the other guests of this glorious earth? Are they getting enough to eat? Do they have a safe place to sleep? Am I taking too much? I would hate to insult the generosity of our good host by taking more than my share. Just like we've misunderstood the parable of the Good Samaritan, we've mistakenly cast ourselves as the heroes in Earth's story. In fact, we are the ones in need of saving. So there's one last place that I want to remind us all that we are guests, not heroes or hosts, but guests, and that's here at Tapestry. We are all guests here. Yes, we have a board of trustees that is ultimately accountable for our financial well-being. They are trustees, entrusted with the responsibility to carry out the mission, but they're not owners. In a similar way, I'm generally responsible for the spiritual well-being of our community, but ministers come and go. And while I serve Tapestry now, I am by no means the host. I don't plan on going anywhere in the foreseeable future, but who knows? Don't laugh at that. Of course, there are the founders of this community. No one knows exactly how they came together in those first few meetings. A few of our members had been around for 35 years. Ironically, I think they would be the last ones to see themselves as in charge. Sometimes we say that as a shared ministry, as a democratically run community, that we are all hosts and all heroes at Tapestry. We're all responsible. But today I want to pose an alternative answer. I've come to believe that our congregation belongs to no one. It is, in fact, a vehicle to manifest the inherent truths that we hold dear. It's not my congregation. It's not your congregation. We are called to be hospitable to each other because we, in fact, are all guests here. That idea of hospitality is based on the assumption that some people are hosts and other people are guests, but not here. Talking about the type of community that Unitarian Universalists build, the Reverend John Burens writes, "It's about having the faith that we can together feed the many who are hungry. Because like Jesus is said to have fed 5,000 with 2 fishes and a few loaves of bread with plenty of leftover, we need to operate out of an awareness of abundance." That's another one of the stories that we know. Jesus is said to have fed 5,000 with a couple of fish and a few loaves of bread. The reason I love that story in particular is that it's not about a miracle that Jesus performed. The miracle rests in the community's sharing with one another. It's a testament that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. It's about a congregation being more than the people within it. In a lot of ways, our community is that story of loaves and fishes. I have seen lives changed here. I've seen miraculous relationships. I've seen hearts mended and bodies cared for with deep compassion. It's a place of abundance, and we are all guests, not miracle workers. The door was open when we found our way in, not because of some great talent or skill, not because we paid a price for admission. We were offered a seat just for walking through the door. Now, being offered a place in a community of love, a community that welcomes you as you are, is a really humbling experience. Let this community be a reminder to us all that we need one another. Our families, our friends. We also need neighbors and strangers who don't look or act like us. As travelers on the journey, we need one another, and that is a good thing. Amen.